with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, we got a great show today. A lot of things to talk about. What's the perception in our country right now? Are we going to have a recession? I mean, you're hearing that in the media. Is that something that the media is promoting because they want this president to lose the election? Is it real? Is it going to happen? You know, what's the perception of the American people? Then, of course, you got China and the tariffs. Are the U.S. government and China talking? Are these talks that are going to lead to any sort of an agreement? How bad do both sides need this agreement? And what is the likely outcome? Much to talk about. But we got a great first guest. And to introduce the guest, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my next book, Birth of America. It's almost completed. It's going to be out very, very soon. And I'm one of the largest collectors of antiquarian maps and engravings going back to the 1400s. At the end of the medieval times, the Middle Ages, and in the humanist movement gave way to the early Renaissance. In the maps that led the Age of Discovery and the explorers going around the world, and in the Renaissance, which opened people's mind. It was this freedom of thought. The Renaissance, whether it was in the sciences, whether it was any science, or whether it was in the arts or literature, discovery, the freedom of expression, just the human spirit to be free, and it expressed itself and manifested itself in many different ways. But what the Renaissance led to, and what these great expeditions in the Age of Discovery, in the studying of the skies and the stars that led the navigation for these people to go around the world and to establish themselves and to establish colonies in the New World. This Renaissance, the freeing of the American spirit, it led to its greatest promise. The greatest promise, the fulfillment of the Renaissance, was the establishment of the United States and the freedom that it brought to humanity, and democracy, like nothing they've ever seen before. And I know it's going to drive my liberal and progressive friends nuts.
That's good.
That's good.
I kind of like that. I'll get 10 copies right now.
In Birth of America, it clearly states and shows and proves that America, the founding of America, was the fulfillment of the promise of the Renaissance. Human freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of the arts, and freedom to trade, and freedom to pursue your economic interests, economic freedom. One of the very basic freedoms of the human spirit is to be able to express yourself economically, free enterprise. And America was founded, and it wasn't perfect. Of course, it's not perfect. It's not perfect today, but it started this incredible journey that had never been seen in humanity before to create this freedom and the freedom of the American spirit, which led to the strongest, most prosperous nation in the history of the world. And it could not have happened without the Renaissance, without this unleashing of the human spirit, without the creation of the United States, and without economic freedom. So, by saying that, and I'm very passionate about that, you can see that, we're going to go to our first guest, who's actually published a book. And he's beat me to it. It's a great book, Free Enterprise in American History, by Lawrence Glickman. Lawrence, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. It was really fascinating to hear about your book, and I can't wait to read it when it comes out.
Well, thank you for that. So, your book and my book seem to dovetail together very, very nicely. I write about how did we get here, and then you take it from there in writing about the very basic human freedom, that of economic freedom and free enterprise, and your book, An American History of Free Enterprise. So tell us, what was the gyrations at the early start of free enterprise in America? And it was not a slam dunk, was it?
No, it's a really interesting issue. And one of the things that I wanted to do in my book is to kind of understand how the phrase free enterprise, which I think a lot of us take for granted, I wanted to show that it actually had an interesting history, that the term has evolved over time. And in relation to what you were just talking about, your book, one of the really interesting things is that in the 19th century, when people spoke about free enterprise, what they often referred to as what they called the spirit of free enterprise. And what they meant was kind of almost exactly what you were saying, which is they want, nowadays when we think of the free enterprise system, I think a lot of times we think of the broader economic system and the business firm that comprise it. But in the 19th century, what it was really about was kind of unlocking the individual's ability to unleash that spirit of free enterprise. And the question was, how do we do that as a society? So in the 19th century, I would say free enterprise was understood as an attribute. In the 20th century, it became more of a noun. So I was interested in that evolution over time because precisely what you were talking about, which is this idea of America being a place where there was tremendous emphasis on individuals being able to find fulfillment and happiness through economic independence.
Well, that is uniquely American. I mean, obviously. I mean, it's a very unusual scenario. Could never have happened in Europe. One of the reasons Europe vegetated so badly and the folks came over here with your unusual DNA to come to this country and take the risk is that the accumulation and holding of wealth in Europe was controlled by a number of families, and it was an aristocratic system. And what we have here, what we've been able to develop here, was exactly what you're saying. Can you imagine economic freedom? I mean, can you comprehend Europe in the 17th, 18th centuries, early 19th centuries, in terms of economic freedom, or at least 18th century economic freedom? What is such a threatening statement to be made to those who really held the power, which means they held the wealth. And for the idea to dream that you could be better, that you could do better, that you can, listen, if I dream it, I can do it, I can work hard enough and make it happen. That system couldn't exist on the old shores. It had to exist here if we were lucky enough to have the right men and women to create this country to allow us to have that dream. So it is uniquely American.
Isn't Lawrence, the fundamental principle of pursuit of happiness? I mean, how do you pursue happiness without economic freedom? I mean, it's right there, right at the very beginning. It's the fulfillment of the promise of the Renaissance.
Well, how audacious to even assume happiness.
That's right. But
right.
That evolved out of this freedom of thought, didn't it?
Yeah, I think I agree with what both of you are saying. I should say I'm an American historian, so my focus is on the United States. So I can't really comment on European developments, but certainly America was unique in how the concept of free enterprise became central to kind of the American mythos, you might call it. And I think a lot of the questions in the 19th century revolved around, how do we create a society in which the spirit of free enterprise is maximized? And one of the really interesting meanings of free enterprise before the Civil War was businesses that relied on free labor rather than slave labor. So if you look in 19th century newspapers, a lot of times people talk about free enterprise, meaning businesses that rely on free labor. And the idea was that free wage workers would, as Lincoln said, they'll work for somebody else for a few years, and then they'll be able to work for themselves because of economic mobility. And then a few years after that, hopefully they'll be able to hire somebody else, and the process will be endlessly repeated. So a lot of Americans, believe that idea of free enterprise, that abolishing slavery was part of the achievement of what American free enterprise could do, because they believed that individuals who had, as you were talking about, the idea that they could pursue their own happiness, that would create society-wide benefits.
Lawrence, we're going to have to take a quick break. A fascinating discussion. We're on with historian Lawrence Glickman, who's also the author of Free Enterprise and American History. Still much, much more to cover. You don't want to miss it. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're on with Lawrence Glickman, historian and author of Free Enterprise and American History. So, Lawrence, very important. Today we are going through a political process, and we're seeing the Democrats really talking a lot about socialism and containing free enterprise, bigger, much more intrusive governments. It's government that is supposed to give us stability and happiness. It's not the human spirit being free to be able to pursue happiness that creates the prosperity. Very, very different views of the world and how we evolve and how we have stability and how we stay as a strong, prosperous country. So we see today, and it's always in the current events. Oh, it's the most important election of our time, and then 4 years from now it'll be the most important election of our time. We've seen to hype up the present day situation to make it the most important of world history of what we're going through. But the fact is that, the country has evolved over a period of time, and we've faced challenges, and many times much larger challenges than we're facing today. So in our history, has free enterprise faced a greater challenge than it is today? And if it did, what sort of challenges has it faced?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I'm interested in showing in my book is that free enterprise was claimed by many different groups in society. So, in other words, there were some people around the middle of the 20th century, there was a pretty lively debate about what kind of society best produced free enterprise. Was it a mixed economy in which government played a role, but also private enterprise played a role? I would say that was the dominant view in mid-century America. In the beginning, maybe in the 1970s, as America had a recession, Vietnam, increasing distrust of government, a version of free enterprise emerged, which kind of pitted free enterprise versus government. But in my, from my history, I think those two ideas weren't always opposed. I think a lot of it depends on what kind of government you're talking about, what kind of government involvement you're talking about. There were a lot of proponents of free enterprise who said we need government to do certain things. We don't need government to do everything, but it's important that government promote free enterprise, and so it's a really interesting question. And as a historian, it's really hard to answer. But I would echo what you just said before, which is that I think we always find ourselves in a situation where we think it's unprecedented. It's never happened before. The challenges have never been greater. But you're absolutely right that there have been many challenges. I would say, from my perspective, the greatest challenge to the free enterprise system was World War II, when, the United States was essentially fighting for, freedom. And so many Americans believed that part of American freedom was free enterprise. And there weren't that many countries in the world that were going in that direction, during the war. And so much of American of the mission of World War II was to rescue and save free enterprise as part of saving freedom for the world. So I think you're absolutely right. And to me, that challenge was so enormous and so many millions of people died in that conflict that even though we're certainly going through, I would say, difficult times today, and our society seems quite divided about a lot of political issues, but I think you're absolutely right that we've been there before.
Let me ask you this. I'm just curious. When we're talking, the concurrent to World War II and our entrance into World War II with FDR as president, we were also going through and trying to come out of a Great Depression, recession that became a very bad recession, which became a very bad depression. And we had a lot of challenges to free enterprise during that time period with FDR's policies. A lot of government control, a lot of policies that today would be looked at as socialist in nature.
The New Deal.
The New Deal, exactly. That's where I'm going. Thank you, Neil. That's why you write those books. You know what I mean?
Oops, sorry.
I do magazines. You do books.
I was just following along.
There it is. No. I'm glad. He raised his hand. He said the thing. You get 2 points for that. You want to go for $10. So no, seriously. I mean, Morgenthau recognized that some of the policies, who was the Secretary of Treasury at the time, said that, our policies really didn't help anything. It exasperated things at times. Do you feel that some of the I'm just curious, do you feel in your reflection on that time period that some of the policies coming out of the administration really worked against or challenged free enterprise?
Well, that's a great question. And I guess as a historian, I try not to take sides in that, but I certainly see both sides. I think from the perspective of Roosevelt and the New Dealers, they always said, we're trying to rescue American capitalism. We're trying to save free enterprise. And I do think many of the things they did helped in that regard. I think that that the combination of the New Deal and the mobilization of World War II were part of, essential in helping America come out of that depression. But the New Deal was very hodgepodge. There were a lot of different things tried. For a while, they were into breaking up monopolies. For a while, they were into recognizing monopolies. It was contradictory, and certainly a lot of things that Roosevelt tried didn't work. And the proof is in the pudding that, up until World War II, he had cut preparations for World War II, he had cut unemployment in half, but it was still, around 10% or something like that. It was quite high. It was really the mobilization for war that brought unemployment down to virtually zero. So, I think there were people certainly who used the term free enterprise and argued that the New Deal was killing free enterprise. But what I think is interesting is that it was a very robust debate, and you had a lot of New Deal liberals who believed that they were acting in the spirit of free enterprise. You had a lot of opponents of the New Deal who believed that they were acting in the spirit of free enterprise. And that debate between those groups is really one of the central things I write about in my book. And I think it's really interesting.
Lawrence, unfortunately, we're going to end it, but fascinating that both sides of the debate thought they were defending free enterprise.
It is.
The current is that one side is supporting free enterprise and the other is supporting socialism. But anyway, that's for another day. Lawrence, thanks for being on the show. Lawrence Glickman, historian and author of Free Enterprise and American History. Lawrence, you've been an incredible guest. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Coming up, we got Nate Matherson, who is the co-founder and CEO of LendEDU. And we're going to discuss, are recession fears valid? Are they overblown or are they real? You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
After moving sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, a fascinating topic, free enterprise in American history. I mean, how do we get here? Prosperity, this incredible system that we have. Up until really World War II. I mean, we talk about the Smoot-Hartley tariffs that started the Great Depression. These massive. Well,
it exasperated the recession we were in. It was terrible.
People say it started, it exasperated, whatever it did, but it certainly didn't help things. Mm-hmm. But America, for a lot of its history, was a very high tariff country. We talk about China, the tariffs of China. We talk about India. We talk about Brazil. And if you look at America in the 19th century, we looked a lot like Brazil and India today, or for that matter, China, meaning high tariffs, protecting domestic manufacturing. And it really did put a stranglehold on the growth of this country. And by the time we got into the 1920s, they felt, when the market had slid, that the best thing to do was, to put your boot heel on the neck of the economy, the throat of the economy, and push down as hard as you could, and implement even higher tariffs and more tariffs and more tariffs and more tariffs and more tariffs. It was sort of like the medicine that we were using to try to grow our country, which turned out to, the Great Depression, as we had just talked about it.
Well, having said that, I mean, you're right. I mean, the Smoot-Hartley was a really bad idea. And it did plunder, just this country went down the tube as a result of that, but also from the reaction from the rest of the world.
It brought the world.
Well, the rest of the world responded to us. So we're in this tariff trade war all over the world. And it just stopped things in its tracks, and a lot of people suffered, sadly.
As a result of that.
As a result of that. I mean, destroyed a generation who then turned around and wound up fighting World War II for us. So just a horrible scenario. Now, the question, are we in that scenario right now? No, I don't. I just don't.
Well, maybe we're not. Maybe we're not in the Great Depression, but we're talking about recession.
Well,
we're talking about recession, and a lot of people feel that the recession fears are justified, and largely because of the tariffs on China, or at least the trade war with China, and the whole relationship. So are recession fears justified? Is this something that the mainstream media is doing again? Just to beat down President Trump? Or
you want me to answer that?
Well, I know probably
we will get there. No, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. I want to know what Nate wants to say about it.
You stole my thunder.
I had to do it. Sorry.
Joining us now is Nate Matherson, who's co-founder and CEO of LendEDU, and he's here to talk about recession fears. Nate, welcome to Made in America.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So, the $1 million question, maybe it's a $10 million question. Are recession fears valid? Are they justified? Is this something that is kind of in the psyche, and perception? Though many times, perception, in the economy is the real thing. If people think it has to be true. Or is this economy resilient and chugging along and doing well, and the market is still responding well, and China and the U.S. are talking at least, and once you hear a little bit of news that China and America is talking, the market is going up again, and things seem to be good. What do you say?
Yeah, well, while a recession is far from certain at this point, and the economy has been very strong for the last few years, there has been a lot of talk about the risks of a recession, and could there be a recession on the horizon. It's been a popular topic in the media lately, at least over the last few weeks, last month. And at our company, LendEDU, we create content for consumers to help them better manage their finances. And financially, we conducted a poll to gauge consumer sentiment around the topic of a recession, to learn more about how consumers perceive the threat of a recession, and how they thought that might impact them personally. Really, the inspiration for our poll was a statement by Bank of America CEO a couple weeks ago. Brian Moynihan said, "We have nothing to fear about a recession right now except for the fear of a recession." And to us, we really took that as maybe the biggest risk of a recession is Americans thinking there could be or there's going to be a recession, and that was really the the starting point to our poll. And so we asked 502 Americans, which was a nationally representative sample, 4 questions about how they thought a recession might impact their personal finances. And we found that 42% of the respondents we surveyed said that they're planning to spend less and save more money due to recession fears. We also found that 32% of the respondents we surveyed reported having nothing saved in an emergency fund, and that 55% of those respondents had less than $1,000 saved in an emergency fund. And then generally we found that our respondents were fearful that if we fell into a recession, then their finances might not make it out okay. The results of the poll were interesting, and the short of it is Americans are relatively concerned that their personal finances might be negatively impacted if a recession were to happen.
Hey, Nate, we're going to have to take a quick break. I mean, I would like to follow up more about your poll and your thoughts on a recession and what folks should do. We're talking with Nate Matherson, who's co-founder and CEO of LendEDU. We're going to be back just in a moment. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're together with Nate Matherson, who's co-founder and CEO of LendEDU. So, Nate, this sounds like FDR. We just talked about FDR just a short while ago. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. And but sometimes that's enough. Perception is reality. So, where you think that this is more of, sort of a dialogue and a perception, but the reality may be very different, what should folks be thinking right now? I mean, you represent folks, you teach folks, you train folks about how to manage their personal finances. In today's economy, what is your best advice?
And the economy has been so strong for the last few years. So this might be the first time that many Americans are thinking about a recession or have worry or additional worries about their personal finances in the last few years. And so for many Americans, I think this might be an alarm, but it also could be a good alarm. It could be a wake-up call. It could be it could give Americans a sense of urgency that, hey, maybe I should be saving a little bit more money each month. Hey, maybe I should have an emergency fund set up regardless of whether or not there's going to be a recession or if the economy continues to be strong. I think taking proactive steps, whether there be a recession or not, to put yourself in a better financial situation, that's always a good thing. Although if 41% of consumers do start spending less money, then that's when that real risk happens. Like, how could this affect small businesses? How could this trickle down through the rest of the economy? And then does that actually bring us closer to a recession? I'm not sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about if it's real or not, or it doesn't really matter. It's what people believe. And if you understand Marshall McLuhanism, then people believe what they see in the media because the media is the message. It doesn't make any difference whether it's right or wrong. If they hear it, they see it, people talk about it, all of a sudden the false recession or the concept of the recession becomes a reality because people say, well, I'm hearing a lot about that. So you hear it on ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, BBC, all these other places are carrying all these conversations for whatever reason. In most cases, from my perspective, it's a political reason. So all of a sudden, the non-recession becomes, well, I don't know, maybe it's real. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a recession coming. Maybe the bond inversions are really showing us, without really understanding what a bond inversion is, because most people don't have a clue what the bond inversion is.
Including me.
No, we've talked about it. You lie. You know exactly what it is now. But the point of the matter is, it doesn't matter. What matters is what they hear. If they hear it long enough, then all of a sudden it becomes a major crisis, and all of a sudden people start talking about it. Then it becomes a real item because it's on the tip of the tongue of everybody. It's sort of like with health care. When President Obama came in and all of a sudden health care, we have a health care crisis. 17 million people don't have health care in this country. Of course, 180 million do. And so we can fix the 17 and keep the 180 with their plan. But we didn't do that. Oh, it's a crisis. So all of a sudden we have a health care crisis. That's outrageous. And we must do everything possible, including passing a new health care bill at 3 o'clock in the morning over Christmas. I mean, that's my point. And I'm concerned that is the recession real? Can it be made up? Can it be a word that we constantly hear and it becomes a reality? I find that to be an astounding thing that's happening right now, Neil.
And Nate,
well, I think
how would you comment to that?
I think there might be some. There's some good that we found in our survey as well. There are some positives here. While many Americans are saving more and going to be spending less, we did find that the plurality of our respondents are not planning to make any changes to their investment allocation or their investment strategy. And really, most of the respondents we surveyed told us that they're going to continue investing, for retirement, continue investing, how they've been doing it. And so I think we saw that there's a lot of Americans that aren't panicking, and I don't think anyone's I don't think anyone's too freaked out, too concerned. I think there's just this general sense of we're a little fearful. So there's definitely.
But I would like to. But Nate, in your piece here, you say, and this is a very stark number, and this is where perception really could create. I mean, it's kind of like the unintended consequence. Recession. There is no recession, but because you say it so much, now we have a recession because people think we're going to have a recession. In your study here, you say 42% of respondents are planning to spend less. That is an astounding number. 42% of them is going to spend less. That means that the small businesses and entrepreneurs and the people who depend on these customers who are spending 42% less are going to be doing less business and have less money to pay their bills and could, in fact, get in trouble if they have 42% less revenue.
I think that is the biggest risk here, in my opinion, for the economy. I agree with Brian Moynihan that the biggest risk to the recession is us talking about a recession. So that is my opinion, too. I think we're in agreement there. And I wonder, there were a lot of people that were unsure as well. So 12.4% of the respondents were unsure if they're going to be spending less. So depending on how the dialogue changes here over the next couple months, it might be interesting to do a follow-up poll to see how things change towards the end of the year.
Well, in any poll, there's always people who are unsure.
Really. But it would be interesting.
I don't know.
No. Where did they get that perception from? What's their source of information to think that they have a recession? That'd be interesting. Where are you getting it from? Are you getting it from the guy across the street or what?
I'll tell you where you're getting it. You're getting it from, and I call it the 3 R's squared. It was Russia. It was racism. And then it's now recession.
That's right. There you go.
So it's one to the other. But now we're on this recession kick. Hey,
great name.
You've been a great guest. But unfortunately, we're out of time. We've been talking to Nate Matherson, co-founder and CEO of LendEDU. Nate, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Take care.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So it's a nice conversation with Nate Matherson about recession fears. Are they founded or are they not? Perception is reality. But, when you're hearing, turn on the television and you're just it's even in the background, right? It's almost like you're not even watching it. But yet it's kind of, it's sinking in when you keep hearing recession.
Look, how hard is it? Think for a second. We all listen to you watch cable news. All right, so you have CNN and all the cable news networks, all the ABCs and CBSs and NBCs and the MSNBCs.
You're sitting in the airport in Atlanta.
I mean, those are the only people watching CNN. The people who are lost in the airport. They're miserable. They're disgusted with the flights. They can't stand TSA, and they have a hostile group of people watching CNN. No one's happy. Everyone's freaked out about the world. And what are they talking about? Recession. So and then you look at the newspapers. God, Washington Post, LA Times, Boston Globe, New York Times, all the news that's fit to print. Yeah, right. So how could they get away from seeing it over and over and over and over again? So what do you think about the recession? What do you think? Do you think we're sliding into recession? Hey, I think this is very recessionary. Look at all the derivations of the basic word recession and where they're going. People are hearing it constantly, so it becomes part of the current. It's in vogue to speak about it, and so it develops a life, just like we're talking about. That's where they're getting it from. And so all of a sudden, someone says 42% of America says, "Jesus, maybe I don't take this seriously. Maybe I back off. Maybe I'll fire a few people. Oh, my God, maybe I'll play close to the vest. Maybe I'll sell my Lionel trains. I don't know. They're going to do something, and all of a sudden the recession's real. 42%. You pointed it out very nicely to Nate. Nate, by the way, was great. I really enjoyed his conversation. That's a lot of people, don't you think?
No, it is, and it's scary stuff. But here's the deal, is that I think, one of the underlying things that if you can point to something and you can say there is a risk, the trade war with China is definitely a risk to the American economy. And the president kind of backtracked a little bit from what he had said a week ago about, more and more tariffs and more more tariffs. I think Monday came around and he felt that, well, wait a second, the market is tanking, the futures are down. This isn't looking good. The farmers are getting upset. He's got a couple of thousand trade groups writing letters saying, don't do this, Mr. President. Don't do this, Mr. President. The entrepreneurial community, the small business community, I mean, he's hearing it, from all parts of our economy that we need a solution. There needs to be a solution. And if there is going to be a recession, it's because American corporations are going to start getting hurt. I mean, look. The China car market is going to be bigger than the American car market. But then when you're essentially taking GM and Ford out of the market, the largest market in the world for cars and automobile parts, it's got to hurt them. And if you take iPhone out of one of its largest markets and you take everybody else, large American corporations that are part of this, the stock market indexes that people are looking at and making their decisions, you're going to eventually find American corporations reporting much less profits. And if that happens, then I think you're going to see a major sell-off, and then I think the fears of recession will be well-founded.
And exactly, and based on real time. Yeah, things that are really happening.
That's right. Right now, there's this kabuki dance going on here, and they're all, kind of playing games, and it's smoke screen and mirrors, and they're not revealing their true hands. They're trying to see how far they can push it and how far they can push it and how far they can push it. But at some point, there has to be some meeting of the minds. And let me tell you, if the president pulls that off, and he does a deal to where we sell more cars in China, and we do a deal to where we sell a lot more agricultural products to China.
It would help the farmers, those poor farmers.
And if he does a deal to where the American entrepreneurs have their intellectual property protected, and that we can go into the China market in the same way that they can enter our market, I mean, he'll be a hero. I mean, he'll be a hero forever. And he'll be a hero, guess what, for those folks up in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, those blue-collar workers that made him president the first time around. They'll make him president the next time around.
Well, not only that, he's going to be a hero to the people in China and to President Xi. You see, President Xi needs a solution for his own self-survival. Gordon Chang told us that last week. So when we come back, boys and girls, next week, we're going to find out about this because we're on the path to what? We're going to find out.
We're going to find out. Well, hopefully we will in the next week. That would be amazing. Rich, we're out of time. I'm so sorry. I mean, I was really enjoying our conversation today. We could have went on forever.
Great. This is good. Let's go get a Coke with Nate.
But don't worry. We're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.